the International Soccer Preview. We are Soccer Files Canada. Welcome to Series 20, the 2023 African Cup. This episode is part 2 on the players of Burkina Faso, the final selections. Here we go. Hello and welcome back to the International Soccer Preview by Soccer Files Canada. We're back for part 2 of our mediacast on the players of the 2023 African Cup. This episode deals with the final selections of Burkina Faso. In part 1, we compiled a list of players and their likelihood of reaching the final squad. That was based mostly on their participation over the past 2 years, but we did consider a couple of other factors as well. We actually ran out of time to do part 2 for some of the teams of the African Cup. So today we're going back to review that and to complete the collection, as it were. So the tournament has been played by this point, but we're going to take the perspective of just before the tournament here, as if we were doing the mediacast when we intended to. So this mediacast is divided into 3 sections. Section 1 is some preliminary information, including a look at games played in November and pre-tournament games in January. Section 2 is the main part of the mediacast, a review of the preliminary and final roster that was released, which we'll compare to the list that we compiled in part 1. And in section 3, we will summarize reviewing surprise selections and non-selections and any new players making it to the final squad, as well as updating on injuries. We had a few for Burkina Faso in part 1. And then we will end with a revised version of our spotlight review, our predictions of who we think will be starters. Okay, let's jump right in. So we begin with section 1, and we'll talk a little bit about the squad. Originally, the teams were allowed to bring 23 players to the Cup, but in mid-December, that was raised to 27 players. So they are allowed to have 27 players, and Burkina Faso did fill the squad with all 27. They filled that using a preliminary squad of 54 players. So the preliminary roster, 54 players, meaning that half of those had to be cut to reduce it down to 27. All right, let's take a look at the games. We'll kind of look at these last games prior to the Cup with an eye to predicting who the starters are going to be in Game 1. So they had 2 World Cup qualifiers in November. That was against Guinea-Bissau. The first of those, that was a 1-1 draw, although we're not really interested in the scores. The second was against Ethiopia. That was a 3-0 away win, so that was a good one. 2 pre-tournament friendlies. The first against Iran. Iran also preparing for the Asian Cup around that time at the beginning of 2024, and they lost that game. Actually, Iran is a pretty good team. And then they played Congo DR. Our information for the game against Congo DR is not as good as our information for the others. We don't have an image of the lineup. I believe it was a 3-5-2, but we're not dead sure about that. But still, we can at least look at who was on the field and, as I said, maybe get an idea of who to expect in the first game as a starting lineup. All right, that is the end of section 1, and we move to the main section, section 2, and we'll begin by saying who we had on our list that was created in part 1. So we have Hubert Veloud as the manager, a French manager there, and that hasn't changed since we did part 1. So we now consider him, we'll consider him a final squad selection. As it were. We also have previous manager Camu Malo left over from our list in part 1. We'll get rid of Camu Malo, who managed the team in the previous African Cup. Okay, so that is the managerial situation. So Hubert Veloud leading them through. Let's take a look at our goalkeepers here. So we had 2 definite candidates on our list. That's Irv Coffey and Kylian Nikiema. one likely candidate in Hillel Konate, and then just two players who seem to be off the squad, who will mention if they made the final or preliminary squad. So let's take a look and see who made it. Okay, I think I have a mistake here, but we'll have to fix that as we go. So Irv Coffey was selected for the final squad, unsurprisingly, the first of our definite candidates, as was Kilian Nikiema. And yes, in part one, we kind of talked about their participation in the 2 years before this Cup, as well as in the previous African Cup. And that's why we've put them where we've put them as definite candidates here. Our likely candidate, Hilal Konate, also selected. And we had a possible but unlikely candidate. I don't know why we didn't put him on the list in the first place, but he was at the possible but unlikely level, and that was Sebas Kula, also known as Sebastian Kula or Sebastian Kula II, but I'm seeing on most of my sources his name is given as Sebas Kula, and he was selected. So a fourth goalkeeper named to the squad here, despite being possible but unlikely. As I said, we had two players seemingly off the squad. The first was Farid Ouedraogo, but he was named to the preliminary squad. The other one, Abubakar Sawadogo, had played in the previous African Cup, but not named to the preliminary squad even here. And as if that's not enough goalkeepers to contend with, they added 4 to the preliminary squad. So we're just going to mention them by name because they may come into play over the period before the next African Cup, which is in 2025. And so they'll kind of be at least name checked here. The first, and all of these were selected for the preliminary squad and none of them for the final squad. So Mohamed Zekwi Traore, or Mohamed Zeeg Traore there, selected. Laji Brahima Sanu, Philippe Mar, or Philippe Mer, or it could be pronounced Mare, kind of the French way, or and the final one, Rabin Ousmane Sanon. So we won't go into detail on those players, but we may see them in the future. There we go. So I'll just summarize. We have 4 goalkeepers coming to the Cup. Irv Coffey, Kilian Nikiema, Hillel Konate, and somewhat surprisingly, Sebas Kula as the 4th goalkeeper. Let's check and see what happened in the games. The 2 November games, it was Irv Coffey in the first and the second. Against Iran, it was Hillel Konate getting the start there ahead of our 2 definite candidates. And against Democratic Republic of Congo in January, also Hillel Konate. So I don't think that constitutes a bid for the starting spot above Irv Coffey. It could be. But it does seem to establish him at least as the backup keeper. So that is interesting insight there. Okay, that is goalkeepers. We move on to defenders, and specifically central defenders. Let's see what we had on our list. So we had 2 definite candidates in Usufu Dio and Edmund Tapsoba, and also 2 likely candidates, Steve Yago and Adamo Nagalo. Also, 2 possible candidates in Nasser Jiga and Trova Boni, and then possible but unlikely candidate Nassim Innocenti, and seemingly off the squad Sumela Ouattara. So we usually kept those names on the list for a reason that is now forgotten in time, but you could go back and listen to part 1 if you were really desperate to know that. Let's take a look at who made it then. So our 2 definite candidates, Usufu Dio, selected for the final squad, as was Edmund Tapsoba. The 2 likely candidates, Steve Yago and Adamo Nagalo also selected. We usually expect about 5 or 6 here, and so it's not a surprise that the first possible candidate, Nasa Jiga, was selected. The second possible candidate, however, Trova Boni, only selected for the preliminary squad there. Same is true with Natim Innocente, just the preliminary squad. And then Sumaya Watara, seemingly off the squad, but at least selected for the preliminary squad. And a couple of new candidates here too. None of them actually making the squad, though, just the preliminary squad. 3 candidates, Amadou Zon, Isuf Paro, and Dylan Uadraogo. So perhaps keep an eye out for those players in the future. Okay, that is it. So in summary, central defense, 5 players brought: Isufu Dayo, Edmund Tapsoba, Steve Yago, Adamo Nagalo, and Nasser Jiga. Let's see the games that were played prior to the tournament. And the first one was a 2-man backline. It was Isufu Dayo and then our likely candidate Adamo Nagalo. And I think in part 1 we kind of said that this was a bit of a rotation among players. In the second one, we have 2 different defenders, Steve Yago and Uadraogo. That must be an out of position player who's going to come up soon. Also out of position in game 2 there against Ethiopia, Edmund Tapsoba playing as the right back there. Against Iran, we have a strange situation in Key. We're going to meet him. He's more of an attacking player, but playing in central defense. A lot of changes here. Nagalo, though, the central defender, was on the field in central defense, and Isufu Dayo playing as a left back. So a bit of experimentation there against Iran. And then probably more similar to what we expect to see in the Cup. Isufu Dayo, Edmund Tapsoba, and Adamo Nagalo in a 3-man backline. That looks like a 3-5-2 formation. So we'll come to who we think are going to be starters when we get to the spotlight review at the end. But that last game, probably the more representative of what we expect. Let's move on to left backs. And we have no definite candidate, actually. 2 likely candidates, but we did add Steve Yago, the central defender, who is secondarily coded as a right back, but we added him to the as a left back because he played in that position. We just saw that in recent games sometimes. Central defenders moving out of position there. Anyway, the actual candidates coded as left back, the first of the likely candidates, Abdul Guibre and Valentin Numa, those 2 likely candidates, along with Steve Yago, who might show up there. No candidates at the possible level, just 1 at the possible but unlikely level, Czech Omar Uadraogo. And then 3 players seemingly off the squad: Patrick Malo, Herman Nikiema, and Ula Traore, or Ula Abbas Traore. We'll see if any of those came back into the picture at all. So let's look at who made it. So Abdul Guibre, well, both of the likely candidates, Abdul Guibre and Valentin Numa, both of those selected. And again, we saw that Steve Yago was selected too, so he might show up on this side. And actually, that's usually as many as a team brings for left back and right backs, 2 players. So no surprise that Czech Omar Uadraogo, the possible but unlikely candidate, did not make it to the final squad. He was selected for the preliminary squad, but didn't make the final cut. And none of our seemingly off the players, Patrick Malo, Hernan Nikiema, and Ula Traore, even none of them selected even for the preliminary squad. Let's take a look at the games and see who showed up there. So our first likely candidate, Guibre, played the first of the, actually both of the November World Cup qualifiers there. We already saw, though, it was central defender Isufa Dio. So we've seen out of position players so much there that we're not confident that the players coded as left backs will actually be playing there. And then a three-man defence. So that probably means that the left back pushes up, but I don't see any of the names here as a winger. So it looks like none of them played in either of the January games there. So again, wouldn't be surprised to see a central defender covering that position in the first game of the Cup. Let's move on to our right backs. And here we had a definite candidate in Issa Kabore, and he's really the only one. Beyond Kabore, we only had one candidate who was seemingly off the squad. That was Seydou Simpor, or Seydou Simpore. And he was not named even to the preliminary squad. So we just have Issa Kabore to deal with, and he was named to the final squad there. So Issa Kabore. Let's see, though, who played as right back in the actual games. It's no surprise that it's Issa Kabore in the first of the two World Cup qualifiers, but we saw that it was Edmund Tapsoba in the second one. So Kabore not starting there. And here too, in the first game, January game, the friendly against Iran, it's Toure. So I'm forgetting his first name. Anyway, we'll come to him soon. Toure, Blati Toure, starting as the right back in the first of those games. But we do have Guibre, the left back, actually playing as a right winger in a 4-4-2 formation. So again, a lot of experimentation going on in these January games. And again, it's probably Blati Toure playing as a right winger in the game against DR Congo, because I don't see Issa Kabore there. So a bit concerning there. Issa Kabore not showing up in any of the last three games. I'm just going to look at the list to see if he's listed as a substitute. I don't have a list of substitutes for the last game, but he wasn't even on the bench for the first January game, Issa Kabore, and against Ethiopia in November. I don't see him on the list either. Anyway, we don't have him as an injury concern, and he was selected for the final squad. So still probably expecting to see Issa Kabore there, though the confidence we had in part one of him being a starter is shaken a little bit by what we see here. Let's move on to the midfield and defensive midfielders. So we had no definite candidates here, but we had a likely candidate in Ismaila Ouedraogo, two possible candidates in Dramain Salou and Sasha Bance. And that was it. That was all we had on our list. We did have a few below that level, but we didn't name them, and we won't unless they come up. Anyway, all three of these players made it for the final squad. Ismaila Ouedraogo, Dramain Salou, and Sasha Bance, all of those selected. Before we look at the recent games, though, we'll cover the central midfield. This is where we find Blati Toure. He's a definite candidate here, but we saw him playing as a right back and probably as a right winger there, but he's actually coded as a central midfielder. We had a likely candidate in Adam Guira. And then that's all we had for central midfielders, except for one seemingly off the squad, Brian Dabo, who we'll cover, I suppose. Let's take a look and see. Blati Toure, unsurprisingly selected for the final squad, as well as likely candidate Adama Guira and Brian Dabo, not selected even for the preliminary squad. However, we do have 4 new candidates here. Once again, all of these named only to the preliminary squad and not making the final squad. So these are names perhaps for the future. Dramaine Campbell, Abdul Yoda, Abdul Bandaogo, and Aruna Watara. So all 4 of those named to the preliminary squad, but we won't go into details beyond naming them. Now we can look at the previous games, and we'll talk about the formations here. It's a 4-4-3-3 in the first game against Guinea-Bissau. And we see Blati Toure, and it's actually the defensive midfielder Ismaila Ouedraogo in the center of that 4-3-3 midfield, and Blati Toure on the left side. On the right side, it's more of an attacking midfielder who we'll cover once we get to those players. In the second game, a lot of changes here. We see Blati Toure playing as a right winger, as we said before. And we see in the central midfielders 2 out of position players. One of them is central defender Isufa Dio, and the other is Key, who we mentioned, which we will come back to when we get to more attacking players. We do see none of the other names here. So in the November games, these players not used very much. Against Iran in January, as we said, we saw Blati Toure starting as a right back there. Here we see Guira, Adama Guira in the midfield alongside central defender Steve Iago. So again, more experimentation going on there. And finally, against Democratic Republic of Congo, we finally see Sasha Bance getting a start. We see Blati Toure there, perhaps as a right winger, and Adama Guira also there. So he could also have been a right winger in that 5-man midfield. Okay, so no player other than Blati Toure being consistently used. Let's move on to left midfielders. We only had 1 candidate here because this position is being used less, but we have Mamadi Bangre, and we did see him show up in one of the games. I'm just, it's against Iran. Oh, well, I'm getting ahead of myself here. Mamadi Bangre was a possible candidate as a left midfielder. However, he was selected for the final cup and did get on the field for the game against Iran, where he lined up as a left winger in that 4-4-2 formation. So slightly out of position, I would say there. Right midfielders, though, we had no candidates listed here, and so we'll go on to the players, the upper left quadrant of the field. The players are usually coded as left wingers, but they might be attacking midfielders or forwards even, depending on the formation that's used. We only have 2 on our list here, neither at the definite or likely candidate. The first one is at the possible level. It's Hussein Bandi. And then we have a possible but unlikely candidate at Usaina Buda. And Hussein Bandi was selected for the final squad. Usaini Buda just selected for the preliminary squad, but not selected for the final squad. And I think we did see Bandi line up in one of these 4 games. Yes, against Ethiopia in the 2nd of the November World Cup qualifiers, he lined up as a left attacking winger in a 4-4-2 formation. And that is all we have. Okay, I'm also seeing that against Democratic Republic of Congo, our left midfielder, Mamadi Bangre, showed up as a forward in that game. So a bit more position switching there. Okay, let's go over to the right side of the field, and actually some of the most talented players are coded as right wingers. And once again, this could be winger, attacking midfielder, or forward. And in part one, we saw some of these players playing out of position because they don't want to limit such talent to just one player in one position. So we have a definite candidate in Dango Ouattara, and then two likely candidates in Abdul Tapsoba and Bertrand Traore. And then we had on the injured list here Cyril Bayala, and so we will talk about him in section 3 when we covered injured players. Let's see who made it though. Dango Ouattara, the definite candidate, was selected. Bertrand Traore also selected, and so was Abdul Tapsoba. So no surprise. Some of these players might show up as central attacking midfielders or even forwards based on the formation. The player on the injured list there, Cyril Bayela, not selected even for the preliminary squad. So that should give you a hint of what we're going to say about him in the section 3 injury section. In short, his injury prevented him. Oh, I gave it away. We do have a new candidate in Regis Ndo. Regis Ndo was, like all new candidates so far, selected for the preliminary squad, but not making the final cut. So once again, a name possibly in the future. Let's take a look and see if where these players lined up. So the 4-3-3 formation. We see Bertrand Traore playing as a right forward in the 4-3-3, and Dango Ouattara playing as a left forward there. So as I said, we're probably going to see more than one of these players on the field. However, that's not the case in game 2 against Ethiopia. Just Dango Ouattara there playing as a left co-forward, so a 4-4-2 formation. He was the left forward in that formation. He got a goal. Dango Ouattara. In the game against Iran, we see Abdul Tapsoba playing just where we saw Dango Ouattara as a left forward in a 4-2-2 formation. And yes, he's the only one there. And in the game against Congo DR, wow, none of them actually on the field. That's a little hard to believe, but yes, none of those players playing the last game before the cup. Nevertheless, we do see some of them as starters. Okay, so yes, we're getting a lot of switching positions there. Even in the November friendlies, I'm not surprised to see it against Iran, but I am surprised to see it so much in the other games. Okay, we move on to the forwards. We have attacking midfielders listed under the forwards. We'll probably change that next time around. Regardless, we have a definite candidate in Gustavo Sanguer, and two likely candidates, Cedric Badolo and Stefan Aziz Ki. We've mentioned Ki a few times. The name we're going by here is Aziz Ki, even though he's listed as Ki on my source there. And that's all we have for attacking midfielders. And in short, all three of them made it to the cup. So Gustavo Sanguer, Cedric Badolo, and Stefan Aziz Ki selected. And even though we said we expected to see the right midfielders playing quite a bit, it's actually these central attacking midfielders who are showing up more. So we do have Sanguer, Gustavo Sanguer, playing as a right midfielder in that 4-3-3 formation in the first World Cup qualifier. And then we have Aziz Ki playing as a central midfielder in the second game, while Badolo is playing as a co-forward in that game. The game with Iran, we have, yes, Aziz Ki playing as a central defender, if you will. So he's the only one that actually shows up among the names here. And in the final game against Democratic Republic, we do have Cedric Badolo in that five-man midfield, as well as Gustavo Sanguer. And yeah, just those two. So they are showing up slightly more than the right attacking midfielders there. And I believe I forgot to mention a new name here. Unlike all new names, just making it to the preliminary squad. This one, Josue Tiendra Biogo. So that's possibly a name for the future, although he does just play in Burkina Faso there, whereas most of them, or a lot of the ones we've mentioned, actually are with smaller clubs in Europe. So they've at least made that step. Okay, now we go to, we don't have any secondary strikers, so we go to our last category of forwards. We had no definite candidates here, but one likely candidate in Jibril Ouattara. And then two possible candidates, Mohamed Konate and Lassina Frank Traore. And a possible but unlikely in Ismail Sione. Let's see who made it. Jibril Ouattara, our likely candidate, was selected, and so was our first possible candidate, Mohamed Konate. However, the second one, Lassina Traore, not selected for the final squad, just for the preliminary squad. But there's a bit of a story behind that. We'll talk about it in the injury section. And finally, Ismail Sione, just selected, just selected for the preliminary squad. He was our possible but unlikely candidate. And here, 5 new names. Again, new candidates selected only for the preliminary squad, but possibly we will see in the future. The first is German-born Daouda Balene. He actually plays for Hamburg. Sometimes they're A team, more often they're B team, but that's a good club affiliation. We might see him. Abdul Kader Ouattara plays for Cercle Bruges in Belgium. Suleiman Alio, the third one, is with Noord-Jylland in Denmark. Apollinaire Bougma, he's in Burkina Faso, and Abdel Zagri in Sion. Sometimes they're 18, sometimes they're B-team. That's Sion in Switzerland. So I did mention club affiliations there because it's representative of a lot of the new candidates, a few of them playing locally in Burkina Faso or in nearby countries, but actually a lot of them playing for teams in Europe, not necessarily top teams, but nevertheless, that's why we think we might see them popping up in the African Cup or between now and the next African Cup. Okay, one more order of business in this section, and that is to look at the games. So we do have Mohamed Konate starting as a centre forward in game 1, or the first World Cup friendly against Guinea-Bissau. And I maybe made a mistake by saying Dango Ouattara starting as the right forward in game 2, because Jibril Ouattara, D Ouattara is what's listed. So it might have been Jibril Ouattara getting that goal against Ethiopia. It was Konate again in the game against Iran, the co-forward with Abdul Tapsoba there. He got a goal in that game too. And then in the final game, Mohamed Konate once again. So Mohamed Konate getting more starts there than Jibril Ouattara. Okay, that is the end of section 2, and we move on to section 3 to cover, to basically summarize surprises and the like. So we begin with notable non-selections, and we really don't have any here other than players, one player missing due to injury, which we'll handle in the injury section. So very much as expected there for Burkina Faso. And surprise inclusions, really only one, the fourth goalkeeper, who we had as a possible but unlikely candidate, Sebas Kula, selected for the final squad there. New players, well, we showed you a lot of new players, some of them with decent club affiliations, but none of them actually making it to the final squad. So this is a pretty stable squad by Burkina Faso, kind of going with the players who have been performing well over the last several years. And I expect that we'll see some of these new players coming in for the next African Cup. Now we move on to our updates from injuries, and the notable non-selection is Cyril Bayala. He, we'll say, is dropped due to injury. He was out with a cruciate ligament injury, and even in part one, we knew that he was not due back until late March. So no surprise that he wasn't fit for the Cup, and basically not a consideration because of his injury. He was a starter in the 2021 African Cup, and we expect to see him back on the team once he recovers from that injury. The other one dropped due to injury was only at the possible but unlikely level, but he might have been at the possible but unlikely level due to several injuries he had over the period, over the 2 years in the lead up to the Cup. So who knows what would have been the case if he had been fit. But it's Lassina Traore, or Lassina Frank Traore, who I think actually would have been more of a candidate. He actually did recover from his injury. His injury lasted up until the Cup, and he was listed as injured on January 10th. But I do believe he played for his club prior to the start of the Cup. I'm not dead sure about that. But anyway, even if he was recovered or close to it, his lack of fitness would have been an issue. The fact that he was named to the preliminary squad suggests that he was close to recovering, but I'm speculating that his injury was ultimately the reason why he was not selected. So we may see him back next time around too. And then one injury that was not a strong candidate anyway, and that is Nassim Innocenti, the central defender. But he had been on a long-term injury, and he too, I may have been mixing up Lozana's playing before the Cup with Nassim Innocenti's, because I do have a note saying he did play for his club in mid-December. But it had been a long-term injury, and I imagine he needed a bit more time to get back to fitness than he had in order to make this tournament. So another player who we'll have to see next time around, but not making it this time, Nassim Innocenti. Okay, that brings us to the end of our look at surprises, new players, and injuries. And we move on to our spotlight review, or basically a revision of our spotlight review that we did in part one, updating it based on the new information we have. And what we have is a whole lot of confusion because, well, when I look at the situation, I'm guessing that even in the November games to a degree, but especially in the January games, we have not so much experimentation, but maybe a chance for all of the players to get on the field, and perhaps experimentation with players covering other positions than their natural position, because we do have a lot of players playing out of position. We have some of the players we expected to be starters not starting as much as we think, which leads me again to believe that maybe it's just giving everyone a chance to get on the field. Anyway, makes it a bit difficult to predict who's going to be starters, but let's nevertheless review what we had last time. So Hubert Velud manager. That looks like we'll call him a starter there. We'll go to goalkeeper Irv Coffey. We had him as a definite starter, but because the other goalkeeper started both of the games there, um, Hilal Konate. Now we are a little less sure that Irv Coffey is going to be the starter, so we'll move him from green to blue. As I personally think it'll still be Irv Coffey, but I'm a little less confident in that. So blue is, we think, a good chance of being a starter, but not as definite as it were. In central defence, at the end of part one, we did think it would be a rotation, really, among Edmund Tapsoba, Isufu Dayu, and Adama Nagalo, and even Steve Yago, although we had him more as a left back. In the games, we do see players, central defenders, playing in the left or right back position. It wasn't Steve Yago, actually, it was the other two, Isufu Dayo and Edmund Tapsoba, starting in those positions. So we're going to stick with what we got here, perhaps even adding Steve Yago instead of a left back, but to the central defence rotation. And now we kind of do seem to think that one of the central defenders may well start either as a right back or a left back. So we can't put anyone in green there, but 4 players in blue. Left back position, we have a little bit more confidence that Abdul Guibre might be the starter there. Oh, sorry, I should change that. So we will remove Steve Yagu as the starting left back and keep Abdul Guibre. Again, not very confident. He started the 2 World Cup games, but then it seemed to be out of position players in the game against, or it was a Sufu Dayo, and then a 3-man back line in the final game. So 2 games there that Guibre was not selected for. At the right back position, at the end of part 1, we were very confident it would be Issa Kabur until he didn't show up in any of the last games. So I checked to see if there was any injury concern, and there was not. However, he was not called up for 2 of the games, perhaps busy with his club Benfica. But now we change Issa Kabur from the confident green we had to the possible to likely blue. Actually, I do think it'll be him definitely in the cup anyway, but a little less of a basis to think that way. In the central midfield, again, we had a rotation of 4 players there, but we're going to reduce that. The only one we're really certain about is Blati Toure, and not necessarily starting in the central midfield, but on the field. The other ones, Ismaila Ouedraogo, Adam Guerra, and we even had attacking midfielder Gustavo Sanguer back here in central midfield. We're just erasing them from the list because there are just too many names. So again, whether he'll rotate as much in the cup as he did in the lead up to the cup, we're not sure. But we are fairly sure Blati Toure will be starting on the field. Left wing, we had Ouattara Dango, and by the way, I checked, and both of those games were started by Dango Ouattara and not Jibril Ouattara. Jibril Ouattara is really more of a substitute, has been over the past 2 years, and was in these games too. So we'll give Dango Ouattara kind of a special mention later on, because we think it's likely he'll be starting, but not necessarily on the left wing, as we thought at the end of part 1. So we'll come back to him in a new section of special mention players. Right wing too, despite the great talent they had on that side of the field, they didn't use it that much in the 4 games. We had Bertrand Traore in blue as a likely starter, but I think he was only starting one of the games there. So we remove him from the list here, as much as we think that he could be quite possibly could be on the field. it would almost be a shame not to use him, but we're just not seeing him play enough in these games to be confident that he's going to be a starter. Central attacking midfield, we are going to stick with Gustavo Sanguer as in green. That we're confident he'll start, but again, we're not sure where exactly he's going to start. For the forwards, there was so much rotation at the forward line, and again, it could be those right midfielders, those right wingers, Abdul Tapsoba, Dango Ouattara, and the player we just got rid of there, Bertrand Traore, starting as a forward. But Mohamed Konate did get a few starts there, so now we think he's probably the most likely among the candidates, or the one that we can be most confident about. And we'll create a special mention category. We saw some players moving around so much that we're not sure where they're going to start. So that is the case for Dango Ouattara, who we think will be a starter on the field, but we're not sure where. We'll also put Stéphane Aziz Ki here, because he got several starts over the last 4 games, but one of them in central defense, even though he's an attacking midfielder. So goodness knows where he's going to show up. Okay, so that's a pretty doubtful list. That doubt created by the variety of players in the 4 games just prior to the Cup. But we do have a kind of a special feature here, because we can actually look at the first game and see what we did get. So we're going to do that. Okay, so I took a little break there to look at the lineup in the first game. And for goalkeepers, we have Irv Coffey. I actually should have added... I should have added as a possible candidate Hilal Konate to the list as a possible goalkeeper, because he did start the 2 games before the Cup. But really, ultimately, we're not surprised that it is Irv Coffey as the starter there. And this game was against Mauritania. That's the 4th seed team in the group. So I think that'll come into effect. Anyway, Hilal Konate not a starter. The central defense, again, these are not really surprising. It was Edmond Tapsoba and Isufu Dio. And I think if we were pressed to name our 2 candidates, it would have been those 2. So not a shock there. But we do expect to see Adamo and Steve Yago coming into the picture. In fact, Steve Yago is in the picture, because even though we removed him as a possible left back, that's where he shows up. So Steve Yago starting as the left back ahead of Abdul Guibre. Again, not really a surprise there, because he had done that in build up to the Cup. So central defender, out of position starter. We were surprised that Issa Kabor was not used much in the pre-tournament games, but we're not at all surprised that he's the starter here. In fact, at the end of part 1, he was probably our most definite candidate as the right back or on the team to be a starter. Central midfield, we upgraded Blati Toure. I didn't change the color, but should have. We upgraded him to a yes, we upgraded him to a definite, and he did start in the central midfielder in the central midfield. Meanwhile, we removed everybody else because there was too much uncertainty there. But the player who did start in central midfield alongside of him was Adama Guira. Not really a surprise there. He was one of several candidates who we thought would be starting there. Over on the left wing, we have Dango Ouattara's name there, but we moved him actually to special mention because we were less certain he would start as a left winger, and he didn't. In fact, to our surprise, he didn't start at all. And we're wondering the fact that he and several other players we kind of expected to see weren't used is because it is against Mauritania, and perhaps they're resting those players for the more important games. But that's just speculation. The player who did start as a left winger is Cedric Badolo. We did see him start a couple of games in the pre-tournament friendly, but definitely I would say the attacking midfielder is a bit of a surprise starter here. Cedric Badolo starting, by the way, as the left attacking midfielder in a 4-2-3-1 formation. On the other side, on the right wing, also a surprise is Mamadi Bangre. He's listed as a left midfielder. There he is starting as a right attacking midfielder. That's probably the biggest surprise of all. Again, because it entails them not using big names like Bertrand Traore and Dango Ouattara, using this player instead. In the center of the midfield, we would have expected Gustavo Sanguer, but that's another surprising non-start there. And rather, it is Aziz Ki, who we did see showing up quite a bit before the tournament, but so not really a surprise that he's a starter, but again, a bit of a surprise because he is ousting Gustavo Sangaré and other big names to be there. So not sure what's going on really with this lineup. The only justification I can think of is that they didn't field their top players against Mauritania, the weakest team in the group. Finally, as a forward, we had added Mohamed Kanate after part one as not a confident, we weren't confident, but in blue. And he is the starting forward in that 4-2-3-1. Formation there. So a few surprises there, especially in the midfield, in the attacking midfield there. But we had noted in part one that there was a lot of rotation of positions and a lot of rotation of players. So why would we be surprised to see that actually happen here? Anyway, that's as far as we can take you. Farther than usual, looking at the starting lineup for game one. But next time it will be the African Cup in 2025. We're pretty sure that Burkina Faso will be there, so that will be our next look at the team. We would like to thank Pixabay and Alexei Ivanov of Mappa Music for the wonderful background music accompanying this media cast.